Welcome everybody to the digital format of RESI. This is the first time I've done the digital format, so let's hope we have a good session here. We're here to talk about investing in medical devices, med tech, and related fields. We're recording this on June 4th, 2020, so don't know when you might be watching it out there. I know the digital conference is next week, so certainly we're right in the midst of a unique time here in the United States and worldwide. So depending on how things play out from here, we'll see how our forecasts come true. But also we'll get into some of the current events right now, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic. So we'll get a little bit more into that as we go along here. And but before we get too deep in, we'll do some introductions. My name is Jeff DaCosta. I'm a Director of Business Development at Medtronic. I work in the Surgical Innovations Division, so work a lot with surgical technology and surgical robotics. But that's about the limit of what you'll hear from me. We're here to hear more from our distinguished panel who are investors in this sector. And we'll have them introduce themselves. We'll go around the horn, and hopefully we get this right. We'll try to go by alphabetical last names. So we'll let them introduce their names, their roles, and anything else they want to share. We'll go Brian, Sam, Diana, and then Neil. So with that, Brian, we'll let you start things off here.
Hi, I'm Brian Grolke. I'm a partner at Volcano Capital. We're an early stage medical device venture capital firm based in both New York and San Francisco.
Sam, excuse me, Sammy Pergan, based in Toronto, founder and managing partner of IGAN Partners. We're a medical device and medtech software investor based in Toronto.
Hi, this is Diana Saraceni speaking, based out of Milan, co-founder and managing director of Penacas, which is a venture capital firm based out of Milan in Italy.
Hi, my name is Neil Swamy. Recently, I'm in the process of leaving Catalyst Health Ventures, which is an early stage medtech investor. I'm now pursuing something confidential, which will be an early stage medtech and digital health advisory and investing platform.
Great. So we've got, I'm really excited. I think we've got a great mix of different coverage areas, different countries, different focus. So really excited about hearing more. I'd like to start off something pretty high level, just to warm things up and going in the same order. Brian, again, starting with you, just would love to learn a little bit more about where your areas of focus are in right now, things you like about what you're working on, things you might even like about your existing portfolio. Just anything to give the audience a good sense of where your active interests are.
Let's see. So, we're an early stage medical device firm. We typically write checks in the range of $2 to $3 million, but we've gone from as low as 1 to as high as 5. Obviously, we start with looking for a device with a very strong clinical economic value proposition. But then beyond that, look for relatively modest cash needs. So we like things that are a 510K pathway, fall under established reimbursement codes and such. And then within that, we're active investors, like to be on the board, like to be involved and add value to our portfolio companies. And we'll really consider devices kind of across the spectrum, on a case-by-case basis. Historically, I think we've kind of focused more on vascular and on spine and ortho. But like I said, we'll look at anything.
And maybe Sam?
So very similar actually to Brian. We focus on medical devices looking for really straightforward regulatory approvals. We go a little earlier. We go in the seed rounds. Typically we'll put $500,000 to a couple million in seed round and $2 to $3 million in the Series A round. We like to have about 10 million worth in each company over the course of follow-ons afterwards. Our focus is primarily working with the Toronto ecosystem and sort of cherry picking the best medical device innovations within the ecosystem. A lot of imaging technology, and also looking for a lot of software applications that are aimed at other hospitals or clinicians. So we invest in both sectors. We avoid pharma biotech.
Definitely, Toronto has done a nice job there. I'd like to give a shout out to that region for doing a lot in terms of fostering the support there for the local medtech scene. Diana?
Yeah, and not very differently here, focus on medical devices and diagnostic. We go anything from seed round to B or C round up to 5 million ticket, but also leading bigger rounds up to 20. Obviously, we leverage our European presence and scout mostly in Europe, in Israel, but also have a good deal flow and considering opportunities in the US. In terms of, we're very opportunistic, but in terms of what we like the most is devices that have sort of an endpoint in their clinical trial, in their approval. They look for big claims that have a therapeutic type of claim, similar to what happens in the pharma world. So devices that kind of treat disease is really our favorite spot, like in cardiovascular or in neurology, or I can think of other example in our portfolio. We also like some hot areas like robotic. We have an investment in, and a few other in diagnostic. In diagnostic, what we like the most is to have new devices that really change the therapeutic approach. So this is what we value the most in diagnostic field. This is it. I mean, we're open and remain opportunistic to all subsectors. So we also have investment in dermatology or in osteoporosis. I mean, in diseases that are most of the time not the most common in medical devices companies.
Neil, obviously, feel free to share or share as much or as little, maybe even what you would like to be focusing on. So I'll leave that open to you, how much you want to share.
Sure. So I'm seeing quite a few companies that are fairly early, seed, pre-series A, sometimes pre-series B. Scientific or clinical founder, incredibly smart, driven, diligent on building their company. However, they need some help in building the company to prepare for raising the next round, tell the story in a proper way, and then ultimately raise that next round. So I tend to focus on companies across medical device, life science tools, digital health, or any combination thereof. Oftentimes these have they provide some kind of therapeutic benefit, whether it's a direct therapeutic benefit from the technology, a means to discover better therapies, or a means to diagnose patients so they can get better therapies. So you can better plan to design the right trial to show that. And then ultimately prepare the company so they can raise the next round, which better helps them prepare for potential exit opportunities.
Great, and I think that appreciate everybody giving that background. Hopefully the audience, and I assume most of the audience here will be the RESI attendees. I know this can get out into other venues, but that's certainly where we're catering this. So knowing a little bit more about who's speaking here, want to go into a few questions this point forward that may be helpful, especially for the RESI participant. And the RESI really characterized by a lot of early stage companies, sometimes at that early stage of funding, maybe really seeking to get that funding where they can get to that next level. So maybe just so that the first time or the novice startups out there would love to hear how our panel sources investments. Are they, and even where RESI falls into it, and knowing that there isn't any prescriptive formula, but there are different ways that people have some more preferences in terms of in terms of deal sourcing. Because a common question you hear is, how do people find out about me? I've got a great idea. I just want to get that idea out there. So maybe we'll go in the same general order, but start with Sam and then loop back around to Brian. So Sam, would welcome your thoughts on overall deal sourcing.
So we tend to, over the last 7 years, we've deployed $250 million Canadian, that is. In total, 90% of it have been in the Greater Toronto area. So we work very closely with the ecosystem here. That's kind of our playground. We're probably the only show in town when it comes to medical devices and software companies. There are a couple of other funds, but really with that focus, we're the only big fund at least. And so we sort of work very closely with the universities, the research labs, the ecosystem, the accelerators, incubators, et cetera. Creative Destruction Lab is an amazing source of deal flow. So we work very closely on a regular basis with Mars. I don't know if you know the medicine and related sciences building. It's the largest healthcare incubator in the world in terms of square footage. So that's primarily where our deal flow comes from. On the imaging side, we'll go outside of we'll look in the U.S. also. We've kind of developed a imaging practice, for lack of a better word, because we have so many imaging companies, and that's where I cut my teeth as an entrepreneur, was in the imaging side of things. So we sort of partner with other VCs in the U.S. when they see imaging type technologies. They let us look at them, and we work together on that. So that's our primary source of deal flow.
And Diana?
Yeah, if you may, I wouldn't want to leave the audience with this idea that we scout for companies. I mean, fundraising is tough, and yes, we do that effort of trying to reaching the best project, but I mean, the majority of the effort is done the other way around, and to get the attention of a venture capitalist is kind of difficult and very tough, to be realistic. So let's not just leave the idea that we are all the time looking for new opportunities. Most of us, most of the time, are overwhelmed by the amount of possible investment opportunities and deals we receive, and it's really up to the other side. I mean, the way the relationship is really up to the founders, entrepreneurs, to get attention and to get the information through, so that we can really consider the investment opportunity. Then, I mean, of course, if they can reach us. There are plenty of ways. I mean, conferences such as RESI are doing a great job to connecting people. But the other way is just cold calls. I mean, the most difficult one is probably in the early days, in the early stage companies, is probably to identify the one person that has a good understanding of the space the company is active in, because in the early stage, it's the company isn't structure most of the time, cannot introduce to the venture capitalists a team of 5 or 6 senior people really that have put all their commitment and all their expertise in building up and writing down the business plan for the company, and so it's still an early stage company. So the venture capital will have to pick it up, most of the story, buy into most of it by him or herself. And so the ideal matching is with the venture capital that has invested in the space before, or has a good, for other reason, has a good understanding of that specific subsector. And then, and we know in medical device there are so many subsector we can go after.
There's some great points there, and Neil, welcome you to add on there.
Sure. So oftentimes, so how do you reach, just taking a step back, how to raise capital, period, right? So fortunately for medtech and medical device in particular, there's quite a bit of interest from both venture and non-venture sources of capital, because I think the story is a bit easier to understand and tell versus hard science, biotech type companies. So what you'll see is individuals, high net worth, family offices, and other investors are also interested in investing in the space, aside from venture capital. I think that's really important because you'll see there are very few medical device venture capital investors, institutional investors. That's no secret. And as Diana pointed out, there are quite a few opportunities for not too many investors. So if you can find additional sources of capital to de-risk your company such that they're ready for some of these high quality, high caliber institutional investors, that could be a route to go. So that's one point. The second point, warm introductions are the best way to get into the venture firms. Oftentimes it's from someone the venture firm has worked with before, or it's from someone they know. But that's generally the best way to get in front of them. But also keep in mind, each firm has its own thesis. And while someone may say they're an early stage medtech investor, within early stage medtech, each firm has its own thesis. So you may be an early stage medtech company, but it doesn't quite fit the thesis. So responsiveness may not be there. So that's just something to keep in mind. Make sure you strategically reach out to the right investors.
Brian, maybe any final thoughts on this specific topic?
Sure. I mean, I like a lot of what's been said already. I definitely agree that the easiest way to get my attention is through a warm introduction, and could come from a portfolio company CEO, could come from a lawyer that we work with, could come from a banker we've worked with. So there are a number of ways in that way, and it's pretty much guaranteed to get my attention. So I've got a strong relationship there, and more often than not, they have a pretty good handle on what we'll be interested in. But that being said, it's not the only way to get my attention. You know, I do have my email address on our website, I think, and you know, I read all the emails that come in. I do my best to respond, obviously, but not always. And then also, you know, startup conferences like RESI. I think actually our last deal was through RESI. So you know, always helpful to network either at a startup conference or a medical conference as well.
And that's a great segue as we get into talking more maybe about RESI itself. And hopefully people watch this before too many, as maybe tips, either before too many meetings or if not before, at least in context of the meetings that they've had. I almost want to get into the mistakes that people make at RESI, knowing that sometimes there is that one shot, people pay good money to come to RESI. They get access to investors, especially those in maybe cities not like Toronto, New York, San Francisco, Boston, where this is their moment. So, because I know from experience in meeting, there's always going to be one or two that disappoint in the course of a day. There's also going to be a couple that really rock star it and really do a great job in their time, in their 30 minutes, almost to a surprise. And I've had a few of those where the conversations really do go pretty deep in a different way. So maybe talking about both the good and the bad as they present at RESI or in similar forums. Maybe Diana, start with you this time. As they get somebody like you who is very busy, what can they do? What should they avoid to make sure that they resonate when they have that time?
Sure. Well, given the time is limited, they should be prepared to adapt the presentation to a little bit to what is my understanding. That's probably the best recommendation I can give, because most of them are prepared to go for like a slide set of 20 slides, and they absolutely want to go through each one of them, and in the end, maybe in the 20 slides, my key point on the topic is not even addressed. That can easily happen, and then I'm left with a no interest. So it's a conversation. It's true, it's a presentation. It's good to have the presentation ready, but at the same time, it should be very interactive, and it should be going from addressing one point to another, and then quickly assess on what is my understanding of the sector. Something I have learned over time after 20 years of venture capital is that I don't sit down at conferences with companies in areas I have never heard of. So I only go for the one I have a little bit of experience on, because otherwise it's wasted time. So I do have a little bit of experience when I sit down, which means I also have a little bit of preconceived ideas somewhere. And the good thing that a company can do is to identify quickly what my preconceived idea is, and if that's a negative, then try to address it.
I think that's a nice subtle point too about the area of focus. I focus in surgical technologies. I continue to get emails from people outside who just want to get my perspective or have a chat with Medtronic, and I can give you some perspective if approached in the right way, but I'm not necessarily going to be a good use of your time at RESI. And that's what I try to reply to people. It's not that I don't want you help. It's that it's just not a good use of your time. But if you want some general pointers thereafter, I'm usually available. Somebody's going to watch this now and then I'm going to get some emails. But I do mean it sincerely, that if people do need to help tailor, use your time, use the investor's time wisely too, and making sure that when you're reaching out that you have that mindset. So Neil, maybe go to you with some similar thoughts on this subject of what gets your attention, what are some mistakes to avoid, making sure that they use your time well and theirs.
Yeah. So these conferences are helpful because, perhaps in this digital world, not as much, but there are many different touch points you can have with investors at a conference. It could be a presentation where you're presenting to a large room of folks. It could be just running into someone in the hallways, which can't happen right now, but something to keep in mind for the future. And it could be the one-on-ones that you schedule with the investors. A lot of this is playing the long game, I think. If you are looking to raise a 10 million Series A and your first touch point is with an investor as a one-on-one, where they've had 20 other one-on-one meetings that day, probably haven't slept much that night before because they flew in late that night, that meeting might not be as valuable as one where you've met the investor 3 or 4 times. They recognize your face from the conferences, from social media posts, from articles, all that. So I would take the conference as yet another way to play the long game. Say hi to folks, touch base, so they remember you. So when that warm introduction comes, or if it had already come, that meeting is much more valuable. You know about the investor, you know what they want, you know their style of communication, how they work, so you can tailor the presentation, not just the slides to what Diana said, but also how you communicate with them. So if you go in very aggressive on a first meeting, sometimes that's a turnoff versus taking it more as a relationship building opportunity.
Agree fully on that. And Brian, you've had some success at RESI, as you said earlier. Would love to hear more, especially about that. Maybe not that specific company if you don't feel comfortable, but what did that company do well? And again, other tips of things to stay clear of.
Mm-hmm. I think, if you're having a first meeting at RESI, you're just trying to clearly and concisely walk through your story and get a chance for the investor to ask questions and make sure it fits with the thesis. You're never going to get a deal done in a half hour or 20 minutes. So it's really the start of a relationship. To Neil's point, ideally you've started much earlier, but if you're first time meeting at RESI, it's the start. And you're really just trying to get the investor to be willing to invest their time to learn more about the opportunity after the conference. Some of the things I think that are counterproductive to that is when people message when they clearly don't fit your investment criteria. So an example of that would be a biotech pharma company messaging me on the platform, and I actually have to just copy paste the response that this isn't what we do. So I think that's kind of a time waster and definite turnoff. The other thing is, we see lots and lots of companies every day. We have a pretty good idea of what we're interested in, what's a good fit or not. And another pet peeve of mine is when people argue. So you say, look, we don't really do diagnostics, say. And say, then the entrepreneur comes back and says, oh, we're a 510K, it's limited capital, like this is exactly what you want. It's like, well, I think I'm a better judge of that maybe than you are. So respectfully, maybe accept that and move on and focus your efforts somewhere where it might be more fertile ground.
Yeah, it comes down to preparation, and I'll say that I totally don't mind getting some extra emails in the contact system and setting up. But by the time you get to the meeting or in scheduling, make sure you know who you're talking to. I think that can really, really help. Even watching videos like this and knowing and hearing some of our audience. Those of you that may be watching and going to RESI probably have a leg up on those that aren't. So you have a taste for what our panelists are saying. And Sam, feel free to add anything else here. Obviously, you get to see some different companies outside of the Toronto ecosystem, things that you go in and like to see from companies, things that you don't like to see from companies in their approach with you.
Yeah, I think everything that's been said, I agree with. Like Neil said, it's a relationship, and like Diana and Brian were saying before. It's all about knowing the VC. I can't tell you, it's right on our website, right on the front page that we invest in medtech, and I can't tell you how many pharma deals we get and non-healthcare deals we get, and it's pretty obvious. And it's the long game. I mean, everybody's got a different way of approaching things. I like to meet a person first, and then get a deck, and then go over the deck myself, and then ask some questions, and then come in for. Everybody's got their very particular way of working. And you just have to sort of adapt to that, so again, the hard push right off the front just doesn't work with me, and it's more of a relationship because we kind of never invest right off the first meeting. I mean, we usually watch a company for 6 months or scientists or whoever we're looking at for a while before we really engage fully. And that's what people don't realize. They think it's all about pitching, but it's more of a process.
Yeah. I think that one danger of Shark Tank and Dragon's Den is the people that watch that show sometimes think that's what RESI is. It really isn't. That's for people who have heard me in similar forums, I say this every time. So apologies for any repeat listeners, though I appreciate if you're still listening to me. But that is the biggest misconception, is that it's not like Kevin O'Leary isn't going to shoot you at the end of your presentation, whether it's good or bad. So maybe going to the next topic, and Neil, starting with you, and it goes back to a subtle point, because I know that one of my favorite things about RESI is that it does attract people from all over. One time, I think in Boston about a year ago or whenever that was, I think I had 8 meetings in a row with companies from 8 different countries. It was pretty interesting, and from literally all over the world. Just curious, especially for those maybe non-traditional markets. Any advice for those, for companies coming from those regions, or especially those that are coming into the United States, maybe haven't been on radar, and building the dialogue, maybe even a little self-aware that they're coming from a region that isn't well covered. Yeah, just would love any thoughts you have on that specific topic.
Yeah, so it's a tough question, because a couple points. First, investors like to invest in areas, and quite frankly with people they're familiar with. So by definition, if you're geographically somewhat distant from where the investor is located, even with these conferences, sometimes it's tough to build that familiarity. I think I would probably lean on Diana for this, because she mentioned she does work a lot with non-Europe-based companies and not Italy-based companies, but I just think sometimes it's really difficult to build those relationships when it's tough to physically meet. One thing that's great about COVID, to spin this a bit, I think people are becoming more comfortable building relationships via video conference. So I think that's one positive coming out of this, which I think is going to be very helpful in allowing investors to invest in geographies that they're not as familiar with. However, the reality of this situation is still that. And that also includes investing in, just specifically in the US, in cities that don't have as much of a venture presence, for example. Areas in the middle of the US, sometimes it's a bit tougher just to get in front of investors. You're not going to that Thursday 5 p.m. happy hour in Cambridge, right? You're not doing that daily local conference. You see the investor maybe once every 4 or 5 months at a different conference that's more national. So I just think it's tougher. So I think if you can find creative means, especially with Zoom and others, where you can build those relationships in different ways, that's probably one piece of advice I would give. And lastly, depending on who you talk to, I think perspectives can change. But very directly, companies that are in Boston and San Francisco are just of higher valuation, oftentimes, than others, period. And depending on who you talk to, oftentimes investors will actively seek companies in non-traditional geographies, because you can find that great technology, great team that's been overlooked. So there is an opportunity for more of a return. So that's a pretty direct piece of feedback on that as well. So I wouldn't discount yourself. Just find more. You might have to hustle a bit more, but find creative means to build those relationships.
And so Diana, maybe go to you. Your experience here in dealing both in RESI, outside of RESI, companies from outside of the North America, outside of Western Europe. How would what advice would you offer to the companies that are coming to RESI, or even those that are outside of RESI, from the non-traditional geographies?
Well, what we have tried to do at Pinacus, but I'm not sure we managed actually. I mean, we have tried and keep trying hard, is to invest very much independently from the physical location of the company and the team. That was since Pinacus' inception 5 years ago, a sort of a common idea that we would want to invest only in subsectors where we feel 100% comfortable, looking for the best expertise in those specific segments, and that would be at cost of geography. So this was the original idea. Now, I am not sure we totally managed to do that, and I'm not sure it always worked, because yes, I mean, physical meeting, especially until before the pandemic, was still a part of a fundamental part. I mean, the physical presentation at our investment committee is a step that is important in our firm and has been replaced with success recently during the pandemic, also with the digital presentation. But I don't know if we're going to go back to that specific requirement or not. But that means we have to meet at least once, right? It's not that we can only invest very, very locally. So we try to replace the comfort with the sector and the fact that we invest in a segment where we know all the key opinion leaders, we talk to them, we have a very good comfort, again, independently from the geography. We understand the standard of care, we understand reimbursement, we understand so many other metrics so well that we feel comfortable wherever the company is. Now, in my 20 years of venture capital experience, I have invested in the US, in Europe, almost everywhere, and in Israel. But never outside of those geographies. I mean, for example, we get some, not many, but a few deals from Asia. So we do have a little bit of deal flow from Asia. We have not a very good understanding of how the legal system of an investment, for example, in China would fit our requirements for the terms or other ideas. So there's probably a barrier somewhere for us to invest in, but let's see how it works, and let's see what the pandemic effect was on the process, and let's speak again in a few years if this has changed or not.
And Sam, how about you? Having you mentioned earlier such a concentration in the Greater Toronto area. Do you look at things differently from abroad? Should, especially companies maybe here, should they be aware of when you have a concentration, just knowing that in advance, or any advice for those in the non-core geographies?
So just to comment on a few things, I do agree that Toronto's a great place to invest. One of the reasons is valuations are much lower, and that was a comment that I think Neil made, and it's bang on. Look, we have invested elsewhere, but we like to have a partner on the ground that's local to the company. We're early stage investors, and in early stages, you have to be close, in my opinion. It's just, if you have to get on a plane, it makes it tougher. So what we encourage people that have interesting technologies that are not from Toronto, but that kind of fit our investment hypothesis, is to go find an investment partner that's local to them that we can work with. And it could be a VC, and they don't have to have actually invested. They just have to say, look, we are capable of investing. We want to partner with you in due diligence. Or it could be an angel group. So we made a couple of investments in of all places, Sudbury, Ontario, which is best known as a big giant nickel mine, the nickel mining capital of the world. It's up north, and it has a great university. And the angels in the town got behind it, and then we came in and invested in it, and they're doing quite well. So we're not adverse to not investing in our backyard. But we just want to have a local partner that is able to sort of, roll up their sleeves locally in real time. And so if you're approaching IGAN, at least, what we like to see is for you to have a co-investor that is local to your jurisdiction come to the table.
Great points. And Brian, maybe some closing thoughts on this before shifting to the next topic for those in non-core geographies.
So we made probably around 20 investments so far, 2 of which were outside the United States, one in Israel, one in Finland. And I'd say on a go-forward basis, I'm not saying we wouldn't do it, but we'd have to really fall in love with the business. There are a lot of challenges investing outside the United States. One is just difficult to make board meetings in person. So even if you do it remotely, there's challenges around language barriers, time zone differences. You don't necessarily have a network of entrepreneurs or people in the management team that you can slot in if you need to. You don't necessarily know the legal system in that country. So there's a lot of challenges, I think, with investing outside your comfort zone. And for us, I think we're going to focus more on US-based companies going forward. That being said, we're not quite as restricted as Sam. We're pretty open geographically within the United States, although we tend to focus on Boston, Denver, Minneapolis, and San Francisco.
Yeah, some great points.
We made a couple of. We made an investment in Minneapolis and Denver. They're good. They're actually great places to invest.
Yeah, some great points there. My last closing thoughts here is my advice for companies is to control what you can control, especially at a conference like RESI, having a good presentation, good slides, working with some of your local country groups and helping get visibility inside and outside of RESI. Having a good website too. I would say that is something that can be a lasting a message for folks. So those are things those are my general tips. It again doesn't come beyond the investing challenges with legal and other nuances. But just wanted, if you can do a few things to get off on a good foot with investors at RESI. So time is moving by quickly here, and I'll really definitely want to cover a topic. As I said, again, for people watching this on a delay, today is June 4th, 2020. So we were right during the pandemic, COVID-19. Anybody who's watching this is certainly aware of what's going on right now. But would love to hear of our panel some firsthand perspectives. And not so much the, hey, I've been watching Netflix or I've been doing a lot of Zooms, but maybe that is part of it. Just how do you see the sector? How do you see opportunities here? Does it create new opportunities for you? Does it not create opportunities? Are you going to be sitting on the sidelines a little bit longer with the uncertainty? So kind of getting into really those fun, the details that our attendees here at RESI may not get to hear from and may even be guessing about, to be honest, just not having that insight. So maybe going back to the start, starting with you, Brian, and going from there, I love your perspectives.
Yeah, so a lot of thoughts here. As it relates to our portfolio companies, we've been kind of thinking about it three ways. If you've got a commercial stage company with an elective procedure, obviously, that's probably the hardest hit. We've seen volumes decrease 70-80% here. Obviously starting to bounce back now as people resume elective procedures, but that's obviously a big challenge because they've got a sales infrastructure and weren't necessarily planning to have zero sales for a couple of months. So that's a challenge. And then I'd say there are portfolio companies that were in the middle of a capital raise, and we're seeing deals drag out, and some also starting to see some renegotiation of deal terms in a downward direction. And then I'd say there are portfolio companies that were more R&D stage, fully funded, and they're kind of business as usual, but maybe we scrub the budget a little bit more tightly just to make sure we got all the excess dollars out and give the runway as much as we can. Yeah, so I'd say, as an entrepreneur in this environment, I'd be expecting a lot longer times to raise capital. So I'd say traditionally, you'd say 6 to 9. I might budget or plan for 9 to 12 just to be safe, and be prepared maybe for more aggressive terms from venture capitalists.
Sam, your thoughts?
Well, first I'd like to say that my kids have introduced me to Game of Thrones, so that's all I've been watching since obsessed with it. But yeah, I think it's been a very interesting time to be a VC. I could tell you that it's much more challenging than 08, 09, I would say. We have two types of companies: the companies that have been lucky to be enough to be funded before COVID-19 hit, and the companies that were going to raise money this year. And the latter need more capital. It's as simple as that. So we've been busy putting together bridge rounds and to just extend the pathway, because we just our view is it's going to be futile to go out and raise capital right now. You're going to go new people, new VCs, too tough. You can't even physically see them. So we just sort of be putting bridge rounds together between ourselves and our LPs to sort of extend the runway of these companies to hopefully to better times. And we've been fortunate here, and I think in the U.S. to a similar extent. I'm not sure about Italy, but you know, there's in the U.S. I think you call it the PPP, which is the 70% wage subsidy, which we have here also. But we also have a bunch of government entities that are co-investing with the VCs on these bridge rounds. And so we've been putting through those companies through that process. So that's a good amount of capital that's coming that is, fairly non-dilutive and, is from the government, which is great. We stopped looking at new deals. We just figured we have a full pipeline. We have the dry powder to invest, but we just have so much going on in our portfolio right now that we basically have said we thought it would be till the end of June, but it looks like it's going to be till the end of September till we've dealt with all the COVID-19 issues. So to do a new deal prior to that is just beyond our capacity. We just don't have the people. So that's the impact we've had from COVID-19.
Diana, any differing perspectives?
Yeah, no, very much the same in terms of the needs for our portfolio companies. Very similar to what we had seen in 2001 and 2008. The need to support and bridge and focus on portfolio needs. But this time, I think we also tried to, because the crisis was a pandemic, it was touching the sector itself. We also tried to see very closely and rapidly what the new opportunities that emerged from it could be for our own investment activity. So one thing we clearly saw is that if you had capital and were prepared to invest over the pandemic, it's a good opportunity. And we recently approved, I think I mentioned earlier, two investment where everything has been done digitally and remote, and we got pretty good terms because of we were fast enough in a time where not many others were looking at those same deals. And also in terms of sector, we have also tried to see again what the pandemic could bring as new opportunities. And one thing we have noticed is that, well, first of all, infectious diseases in general is an area that is not very hot usually in terms of investment, and now probably has a different relevance for everyone. And also diagnostic has a different value, because we all understood that whatever happens in a pandemic like this one, by the time you get therapeutics on the market or vaccines on the market, it takes a huge amount of time. And the only tool you're really left with in this time frame is diagnostic. I mean, that's the only thing you can really leverage. So, I mean, diagnostic also in infectious diseases and other has attracted again a lot of our attention, and we are looking at opportunities in the space. But so focusing on our portfolio, but also scouting actively for new investment is to trying to catch the opportunity.
Leslie, Neil, your thoughts?
Yeah, clearly investors are spending a disproportionate amount of time focused on the portfolio over new investments. Not just time, but capital as well, and trying to bridge the company through these times. So by definition, it's tougher to raise capital. It is what it is. However, Again, glass half full. Take the chance, if responsiveness is low, take the chance to really think about the story that you have, really prepare for a lot of these future investor discussions. Reach out. It can't hurt. You may not get a meeting within a week or two, but again, stay in front of folks so they don't forget about you. And if your company has a COVID twinge to the story, you're a respiratory company, you're a diagnostic, whatever it may be, obviously pursue it, but don't oversell it. I think you tend to see a lot of companies trying to play the COVID angle in some way. And as an investor, you see it and you can tell that they're just trying to play the COVID angle in some way. That ends up being a turnoff. But if you can play the COVID angle in the right way, such that it provides appropriate proof of concept for your company, that helps de-risk the company going forward, I actually think that's really valuable. So just cleverly think about those things and see what you can do. And, we will get through this. We've done it before. We'll do it again. Things will open up. Things are already starting to open up slightly. There is a bit more optimism around the table, not just from venture investors, but also from non-traditional investors. People are now a bit more willing to deploy capital than they were 3-4 months ago. So, by September or even later, things will get better.
Great. And unfortunately, looking at the clock, there's so much more I would love to talk with folks here. But even though we don't have people coming into the room, much like a real RESI, we are in the closing moments here. So maybe one last, maybe lightning round if this were a television show. Last 30 seconds or so for each of you. Go one last time around. Any final thoughts, either on the year ahead, what your expectations are, tips on RESI, whatever you really want to close and leave with the audience. So Brian, start with you, and we'll go around from there one last time.
Sure. I think on an optimistic note, I still think the medical devices is a great space to invest. There's still going to be a strong need here, and from an investor's perspective, there's always a funding gap between seed and Series A, and I think the prospects are strong in the medium to long term. So I think we can get through this COVID pandemic and emerge on the other side in good shape.
Sam?
Yeah, I think it's COVID-19 is going to have for some companies it's been really beneficial, and if you're in digital health, but I think COVID-19 is going to have a short-term impact. But medium and long term, I think you're going to see a lot more investment in healthcare across the board. So you're in the right sector.
Diana?
Yeah, same optimism coming from the attention we had on the sector that will translate in more capital, and also in new business models, such as, for example, some out-of-pocket. There were too many people that all of a sudden realize they can and have the power to take care of their own health. And there will be new business models coming out of this, and they will generate potential new business. So I'm very positive on the sector again.
Finally, Neil?
Likewise, short-term hit, medium to long-term benefit for healthcare, and very specifically medical devices. I think times like this have highlighted the need for non-biotech companies like medical devices, tools, diagnostics, and digital health technology. So I think you're going to see a lot more attention there.
My final thoughts here. I guess I have the last one with the microphone, so I'll offer my final thoughts. Usually my tip is to drink a lot of tea at RESI, because your voice can kind of go in those loud rooms. But in the digital world, things are a little different. And I think, as was referenced earlier, use that to your advantage. I think we are in a good sector. Things there will be more investments. There may be some shifts in terms of focus that may help you, it may hurt you. Do your homework, use the time. Everybody is at home right now. So that if, for those that are attending, do the extra homework, feel free to reach out to folks who, like myself, I will do my best to respond. I really do mean that. Reference, but do your homework. I always appreciate a little bit of extra homework or sincerity, and we'll try to help people out. This is a one connected world. We're all trying to help people in this field in medical device investment, and we're trying to bring these solutions to patients that need it. So I think it's a really great time, and I wish we could get into all these topics at a lot more length, but we are at time right now. So we'll conclude this, but want to thank all the panelists for their time today. Also want to thank the audience who tuned in, and hope that you got something from it. And again, hope it's a start for additional conversations that you may have with any one of us or the other RESI investors coming to this year's digital conference. So with that, we'll conclude this, but hope you all best of luck and be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Thank you all.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.